Hello, my name is Joel Stattelman. It's my great honor and privilege to speak with you on Memorial Day 2020. When my good friend Tom Nelson and my former student athlete Jim Teskey asked me to speak, I reminded them that I'm not a veteran. My brothers Rich and Jerry are both veterans, so I'll speak in honor of them and all veterans, including the past and present members of Campbell Williams Post 258. I'm proud of all of you. Tom and Jim thought that since I know a lot of area people, I might have something interesting to say. Memorial Day comes from the word memory. My earliest memory of Memorial Day was listening to Don Williams read the roll call of all the deceased veterans from Clinton. I would listen with respect and awe as a young boy, especially when someone was named that I knew. Tom Nelson carries on this tradition today. Don did it so faithfully and well for so many years. Now Tom is doing it just as well and carrying it on for more years. Each year, the list grows longer and longer. Of the many Memorial Day speakers that I heard, the ones that stand out in my memory were my high school teacher, Don Frederick, and Bud Robertson, who told about the island fighting that he went through during World War II as a Marine. I also remember when the 3 Clinton D-Day veterans were honored on the stage. Those veterans at that time, all deceased, are Ray Falkins, Fran Paulson, and Don Frederick. I also remember when the members were honored with their 50-year pins and later 60-year pins as Legion members. When Ivor Moberg received his pin, he was the last surviving charter member of the Campbell Williams Post. Now he's been gone for 2 years. The ceremony at the village square in the cemetery have special memories for me. As a young Cub Scout, we watched in awe as the Legion fired their rifle salute and taps was played in the distance. After the dismissal and the order of fallout, we all raced out to grab the spent cartridges. I do remember I finally got one. When I was in high school band, we'd march in the Memorial Day parade from Main Street to the school, and then also play some selections at the school, which still goes on today when they're able to. I recall one year we marched all the way to the cemetery, but I think they gave us a ride back. In recent years, the potluck dinner has been a way to see good friends. I always look forward to see Floyd Falkins and his wife Leon return to town. Floyd was an honored veteran and a member of Post 258. Originally, Decoration Day was to honor those who had been killed at war. It goes all the way back to the Civil War. Later on, it became called Memorial Day and was expanded to honor all the deceased veterans. We now remember all the deceased of every division, I should say, that's in the cemetery at this time. We decorate all the graves. We do have a Civil War veteran or two, or many more than that, I believe, at the cemetery. Many of them came to our area to homestead after the Civil War. There's even a Spanish-American War veteran that's included in the roll call. It was the veterans of World War I and World War II that I remember growing up in Clinton. I remember talking to one World War I veteran, Manfred Wemblum. He said to me in a hushed voice, "Have you ever heard of Sergeant York?" I said, "Yes, I've seen the movie about him." Then he replied in that same hushed tone, "I was with him." No doubt he was with him in World War I. Manfred was a celebrated veteran of World War I. After the war, Manfred Wemblum attended the historic Paris caucus in March of 1919 while he was still stationed in France. The caucus established the framework for what would become the American Legion. Manfred Wemblum also went to the first convention of the American Legion in Minneapolis in 1919. Years ago, Don Williams and Manfred were honored as part of the Legion newspaper that came out for their role in the Legion. Another World War I veteran that I remember was Tom Schlemme. Tom used to play cards with his friend, another veteran, Erich Hildebrandt. Both men fought in the Battle of the Argonne Forest in 1918, but they were on opposite sides. Erich fought for his home country of Germany. After the war, Erich came to the United States and settled outside of Clinton. Old enemies became good friends, which is the case today with some of our old enemies. Legion Post 258 was originally named after World War I Gold Star soldier Charles Gordon Campbell. I found his grave marker at the cemetery, and on it reads, "In honored memory of Charles Gordon Campbell, 80th Company, 6th Marines, who died somewhere in France, July 19th, 1918. Semper Fidelis, or Semper Fi, which is Latin. It's the Marine code or motto that means always faithful or always loyal." The World War II veterans were part of the greatest generation. Many of my high school teachers were World War II veterans. Many went to college in the GI Bill. Band teacher Curtis Pierce also taught history. He was a great teacher. He told us stories about his time fighting in New Guinea and what he went through. Principal Ken Melby was a World War II Navy veteran. And little did we know that industrial arts and ag teacher Don Frederick was in an LST landing craft taking soldiers to the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944. In the Depot Museum in Clinton, we have uniforms from some of the Clinton World War II veterans. Among these uniforms that were donated to the Depot Museum are the uniforms of Ted Nelson, who served in the Pacific in World War II, Sandy Nelson, who was the first in Big Stone County to enlist at the beginning of the war. There's also the uniform of my second cousin, Leonard Schaller, who was wounded at Anzio in the invasion of Italy. He was an example of a young man who left the farm for the army, went overseas, fought against an enemy, saw different parts of the world, came back, went back to the farm, spent the rest of his life there. He was one of that greatest generation that experienced something that most generations have not. In the depot, there was also a picture of Glenn Shannon posing with his World War II aircrew. Glenn flew a B-25 bomber against the Japanese in the island campaign. He often told me stories about when he flew just over the tops of the treetops to drop his bomb load. Of the many gravestones in the cemetery, it tells of different deceased veterans. On the back, there's a plaque of one soldier, Sergeant Henry Alberts, who won the Silver Star in World War II. He was also wounded and received the Purple Heart. Talking to his son, Alan, he told me that his dad never talked about the war, which was very much like a lot of the veterans. They wanted to forget, but we should always remember what they did. We also have some World War I artifacts in the Depot Museum belonging to Fred Grimm and Henry Grimm. Those things picked up on the battlefield, as well as some of their uniform artifacts. In 1996, veteran Dave Torgerson printed a memorial tribute to the veterans in the Northern Star. It includes many stories and newspaper clippings from the Clinton Advocate way back at the World War II time. It's full of stories about veterans at the time in the Army or Navy or Air Force or Marines, home on leave, what they sent home, when they were being shipped to here or there, when someone was wounded or killed. The whole story was in there, and Dave put a great story or article or newspaper together at that time. It's something for you to see if you ever want to learn more about our Clinton veterans in World War II. Among the 9 Clinton soldiers killed in World War II, a few stand out to me. There was machinist's mate, Navy sailor Dayton Betts. He was the uncle of a good friend of mine, Tim Moberg. And I knew that Tim's middle name was Dayton, named after his deceased uncle. By Dayton, it states, killed in action while serving on the Frederick C. Douglass, Frederick C. Davis, somewhere in the Atlantic. His body was never recovered. Tragedy. Corporal Marion Petrick, another of the Gold Star boys, killed by a robot bomb in a hospital pharmacy of the 15th General Hospital near Aachen, November 24th, 1944. Something tragic about his story, his father, Frank Petrick, was the telegraph operator at the depot. He received the telegram telling of his son's death as he transcribed it. What a shock it must have been, and a terrible thing to hear of the loss of his son. Lieutenant David Beatty, another Gold Star boy, he had it easy to start with. He was assigned to instruct soldiers and not having to go overseas. But he requested a transfer. He wanted to join his outfit in North Africa. It was the Ortonville National Guard, which had been activated. He wanted to go fight with his friends and comrades. He was killed in action at Van Buch Pass, North Africa, April 9th, 1943. My wife and I purchased the Beatty home, the Beatty house, and moved it to a new location, have remodeled it, and we've lived in that same house for 43 years. The same house that David Beatty grew up in. Lieutenant Charles Williams, whose name was added to the post to become Campbell Williams Post after the war, he died when his bomber crashed on August 23rd, 1942, before he actually got sent over for action. Another tragic thing happened to my wife's uncle, Virgil Sigler, who was in the role of the Clinton veterans, although he didn't live in Clinton at the time. He survived the sinking of the aircraft carrier Wasp. He swam away from it and was saved, only to be killed in an accident after the war on an aircraft carrier when the catapult that caught the planes exploded. And he was killed in a tragic way after fighting in the war. They all made the supreme sacrifice for our freedom, and they're just a few of the many. The Korean conflict was known as the Forgotten War. Veterans finally received their overdue respect years later. I remember listening to Ken Benson telling about the artillery firing in Korea. I believe he was also a National Guard unit that was activated. Many of our present-day Legion members are veterans of the Korean War era. Veterans from World War II and the Korean War were very influential in constructing Clinton's Memorial Building in tribute to all veterans. The Memorial Building has been the pride of Clinton for many, many years and continues to be so. And the word itself, memorial, means so much in memory of all veterans. War in Vietnam followed several years of peace. Many Vietnam veterans are deceased, buried at the Clinton Cemetery, as well as other places. I looked at the Legion flag that was up in the cemetery, still up there, standing proud, and it was erected in 1970. Hard to believe it's been 50 years since that flag was erected. It seems new. I knew of one person who lost his life in Vietnam who was originally from Clinton. His name was Ernie Thorson. He was a childhood friend from our neighborhood. His family moved away when he was about 10 years old. Years later, I learned that he had been killed in Vietnam on April 30th, 1970, 50 years ago, just last month. I found Ernie's name on the Vietnam Wall when I was in Washington, D.C. last year. Seeing the Korean War Memorial, World War II Memorial, and the Vietnam Wall all in one area was a very moving experience. Also seeing all the people there honoring those who were the dead and participants in those wars. Visiting Arlington National Cemetery and seeing the tomb of the unknown soldier and the changing of the guard was also awe-inspiring. I recommend anyone who's ever in Washington, D.C. area to visit these places and pay respect to all the veterans of all wars. Veterans of the Vietnam era are a big part, they are a big part of the Campbell Williams Post 258. Our most recent veterans served during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We've also lost some of these veterans. Among them was Frank Killen, who was one of our Clinton's youngest Legion members. We always saw Frank in the honor guard at all Memorial Day ceremonies. Many of the deceased and living veterans were not involved in the actual combat, but they all risked their lives whenever they served. All military personnel can be called upon to defend our country at any time. Everyone in the military can be and were in harm's way at one time or another. When Tom Nelson reads the roll of the Legion deceased, you'll see that many new names are added from last year. I understand that this year the Legion Auxiliary deceased will also be on display. They should be honored as well as all the Legion members as playing a large part in Post 258 through the years. We most recently mourn the loss of auxiliary member Ann Nelson. The father of my classmate Allison Olson, Curtis Olson, is one of the remaining World War II veterans in the Legion. He, among others, Bud Denai and Muriel Geyer, are the remaining World War II vets. They have all been Legion members for over 70 years. We thank them for their leadership. We thank Curtis for the years that he always took great pride in leadership in Legion and continues to do so. We also think of all the departed friends and family members on Memorial Day. That's why we decorate all the graves, not just the graves of the veterans. When you visit the cemeteries on Memorial Day, it's evident that all those who are there are being honored. In this troubled year of 2020, Memorial Day also honors those who have died fighting our most recent enemy, become known as COVID-19. We're all becoming veterans of this war against this disease. Let us all pray to win the battle against the virus and all other diseases. In closing, I'd like to thank Campbell Williams Post 258 for allowing me to speak to you on this Memorial Day. Thanks to Janine and Jim for making this program possible. Once again, this has been my great honor and privilege. Thank you, veterans of all wars and all veterans today.